What's up, everyone? Welcome back to another year of Mr. Clark After Dark. Yes, I did end up taking the summer off. It's been a long, journey, even though I absolutely hate that word. Over the past few months, finally moved to New Brunswick now, all settled, have a new role at Beaconsfield Middle School in St. John, New Brunswick, which is going to be pretty crazy because I've been pretty much focusing on social studies, history, pretty much applying everything from my first degree into whatever role I was doing. And now I'm going into a middle school resource position where I am definitely stepping out of my comfort zone, kind of getting in front of like special ed and doing like IPPs and all that stuff. So I think it's going to be fun. I'm looking forward to being back into a middle school again. I've never taught anything as low as grade 6 before. So yeah, I'm going into a new city, a new year, not having my own classroom. That's going to be very weird. Not doing social studies, which is my other comfort zone for sure. Kind of been working with that for a long time, for basically the last 8 to 10 years of my life, pretty much dedicating everything to that specifically. I'm kind of just moving into a new role in education now, which is very strange, but it's only for a year. It's a temporary contract, as pretty much everyone does when they move into a new city. So definitely going to miss McTavish coming up in this next few weeks here. I've been checking my email every now and then, still seeing what's kind of going on at the school, which is embarrassing, but it is what it is. I'm definitely not one to vlog or blog or even try and focus much on myself in regard to the podcast, but I did kind of want to just come on, give an update of kind of like what season 2 will look like. As of right now, I don't really plan on having next summer off for this. I did actually enjoy having the summer to just kind of, I'd say unwind, but that wouldn't necessarily be the case, as I did end up joining a group through EF Tours with the Wood Buffalo Youth Travel Association, where we ended up traveling to about 7 different countries in the span of 18 days. It was a very, it was an awesome trip. It was very long. It was very hot, like 38, 39 degrees almost every day, but got to see a lot of cool sights, try some cool foods. And then the day I got back on July 23rd, I ended up getting my U-Haul. And then 2 days later, I moved across the country to New Brunswick. So finally now getting settled. I'm glad that I didn't end up trying to keep up with the podcast, because I think it would have felt very forced, and that's not something that I want to be the case with the podcast going into year 2. Who knows what next summer will bring? Maybe I will kind of take the break, and maybe I'll just have things kind of planned bi-weekly, but I'll play that by ear when that time comes. For the future of Mr. Clark After Dark, I guess, of what you guys can expect to see from me, as I know a lot of people who listen, I've actually been it's kind of cool looking at like my Buzzsprout thing and seeing that I actually get listeners from all over the world, which is kind of cool. It's not like it's a crazy amount of listeners, but it's still interesting to see like what countries the downloads come from. But for those of you who have been keeping tabs on the show and kind of what the direction looks like, I did find that the main trouble that I had with the podcast this year was trying not to ask a lot of the same questions. I've even noticed that in my time listening to all sorts of podcasts. Like this past year, I listened to Modern Wisdom a lot and Huberman Lab. And I find more often than not, almost every podcast I listen to, I eventually get bored of because they do seem very repetitive. Now, a lot of those podcasts I listen to are significantly more popular than my own, but I still think the same idea comes into play whenever someone starts like making too many podcasts or too many episodes. You can kind of get into this rhythm of asking similar questions and pretty much listening to the same podcast over and over again, which even myself, I felt that I was starting to do. Now, the more I would listen to podcasts of myself as I was like editing them and making descriptions, I did find that being my own self-critic, I found that when I'd actually listen through them, they weren't as bad as I kept thinking they were like awful in my head. But I guess my point is, what is going to, like, how does the show, I guess, grow or adapt or change over time? So I love kind of just like shooting the shit with teachers, having fun, talking about stories, talking about growth, in like a non-cheesy growth mindset way, but just like talking about our stories, seeing if there's anything that's potentially funny in there that can help someone else grow. That really is the primary goal the goal with this whole thing is to try to communicate something worthwhile to you, whether that has value in humor or it has value in education. If you're a teacher or if you're considering teaching or just kind of wondering what we do, that is the primary goal. I will say that some of my favorite episodes that stand out are definitely ones like Daryl Davis when he came on. I had recently had Carl Azus on, who's going to be coming on in like season 2 here in a few weeks. Every podcast I've enjoyed. I can't say there's anyone that I really have not liked. And there's some that have been a bit better than others. And I'll just kind of leave that at that when it comes to my own self. But that could be my own preparation for podcasts, that maybe I did something or did not do something that could have made it better. So for year 2, my goal is definitely, I had like a string of educational, I guess, comedians. Like there's a Bored Teachers Lane on social media that's pretty popular. I definitely am not going to become a comedian. I'm sorry to some of you that want to see me perform, I know. But I definitely like those videos like Daryl Davis, like those kinds of figures that have a very like rich story that is still kind of educationally relevant. And Carl Azus was awesome to have on. Excuse me. He was awesome to have on. And he's been on like CNN for 10, 15 years. And we were just talking about like the creation of his own show and creativity and stuff like that. So I'm definitely still going to have a lot of teachers on, especially now living in New Brunswick. I'll probably start to reach out to people. I know we haven't set a date yet, but the superintendent for the district out here has agreed to potentially be on. So like, that would be super cool. I would love to do that. But yeah, I found that the original goal for myself in creating the podcast was to make a teaching podcast for teachers. Now, what was very difficult in that was you're kind of making a podcast for arguably one, not the busiest profession, as I know there's a lot of busier ones, but very much a profession that you don't have a lot of spare time. And when you're in your spare time, you don't really want to be listening to stories about teaching. So I definitely found that a bit difficult to navigate, I guess, in garnering interest, if that were to be kind of my thing for that. So on top of like having people like Daryl Davis and Carl Azus, I actually have Jen Gonzalez, who's coming on in the beginning of season 2 here. And our first ones, I'm going to start with the one and only Mr. Hamed, who's going to come out August 27th and 28th. I'm going to do like a double roundup because we had about a 2-hour conversation. It was awesome, even though he absolutely lied to me about his VP gig when I asked him about it initially. So I guess congrats to Sobi. So he'll be the launch for season 2. The plan is to kind of go every Tuesday again. I would definitely like to talk to him a bit more about like the traveling that I did and kind of the unexpected, I guess, perks or opportunities that come with teaching, like being able to chaperone a trip to Italy with EF Tours, being able to chaperone a trip to all these other countries just from, like, I even remember when students were asking me to be a reference for their passport. And that was very interesting to me because teachers were kind of considered to be like a trusted individual that the public sees as someone who can sign off on a passport. So that was kind of interesting, like the little things that kind of come with teaching that you don't really think about. But yeah, so on top of like Sobi and Jen, I have a few people who are like professors from UNB who are going to come on the podcast as well, because I think when I had Dr. Elizabeth Washington and Dr. Catherine Van Kessel, I love getting into the nitty gritty of any sort of educational nomenclature or just kind of getting into trying to add layers of complexity to the very general education that we receive. It's definitely a struggle for teachers to kind of like specialize. I find that maybe it's my own case with secondary social studies that I was like locked very much in a subject that was very hard to, I guess, kind of like add pedagogical variety to. But anyway, all that is to say is that part of the future of the episodes as well as like trying to have a few more comedians on and people who I know, just teachers, kind of having general conversations. I would love to have more professors on, other people like that, even if they're not necessarily education professors, just talking about almost, the hard part is almost anything can kind of be education related if you want it to be. Like if there's someone talking about sobriety, it's like, oh, let's talk about the mental health, substance abuse crisis in like grade 7 to 12. Almost anything can kind of be related back to that. So There's definitely some challenges, but I'm very much looking forward to continuing on with the podcast. I know a lot of people ask me when you move, because I've been planning this move for a long time, are you still going to keep up with it? I didn't see why not. I mean, it's something I just kind of mostly do online now, I would say, other than, and I have this fancy bookshelf behind me that makes me look like I'm smart. Eventually, I'll have my degree over here on the wall on the shelf. It'll be very official. I did forget my mic stand in Fort McMurray, though. I'm devastated. So I used to have it like kind of right in front of me, and now it looks like it's just kind of about to hit me in the face, which I don't like. Um, in getting some feedback from some people in the audience and people who have listened and even people I've had on, one of my favorite parts about doing the podcast, I would say, is that there's always still things that teachers can't really say when you're currently still employed as a teacher. You don't really want to be seen as the one who's just kind of openly talking shit about your job and especially even your colleagues. Nor has it ever been my goal. I would like to see a bit more audience driven content, and that's not me saying I don't want to do the work for it. It's mostly whenever you have like a funny story, you can't use students' names, and I never would on here, but it's always better when you can kind of meet myself and my guest can kind of dissociate and talk about the story. So that could be an idea for trying to add some segments to the podcast. Like I know something I thought about doing a bit more of was like discussion on like certain quotes or passages, maybe from books or anything really. Like I know Modern Wisdom, the podcast with Chris Williamson, he'll often have like 17 things you didn't know about self-growth. And then they'll have like, it's literally 17 quotes that he talks about. And I kind of do a similar thing at the very end where it's like education is what remains once we forget everything that we learned in school. So I think something like that, a bit more actually like blended throughout, might be part of like kind of like what changes with the show. Just kind of add a bit more routine to the listener, if that kind of makes sense. Because sometimes it can be, the episodes can be very different. So maybe like having a bit of consistency and like hearing different perspectives rather than kind of being like, oh, how do you grow as a teacher? And kind of not keeping it as general and kind of letting the conversation create itself. So like that might be somewhere that we go. But yeah, that's kind of the vision for Mr. Clark After Dark season 2. If you can even call that a vision. I'm definitely looking forward to the new chapter. I'm very much missing everyone back in Fort McMurray. I almost just said home, but it is no longer the case. So yeah, good luck with the year. Please make sure to download, subscribe. Please provide feedback on the show, whatever you'd like to do. And yeah, come on and join the dark side, unless you're scared.